Hey guys, so this video is to kind of compare a Hackintosh to the newest Mac Pro, the one that was released end of 2013. I just recently built a Hack Pro. Actually, it's been about probably 6+ months now, but I've been tinkering with it ever since, and every time I go online to look up stuff to tinker and change, modify, and make better, whatever, I'm constantly finding posts in certain forums asking questions like, is it worth building a Hackintosh versus just buying a real Mac or just buying a Windows computer? How hard is it? Things like that, which isn't a bad thing. Like, I'm not dissing the forums or anything like that. Just people are asking these questions quite a bit. So I decided to make a video to kind of just go over a Hackintosh, or as I'm calling mine, a Hackintosh Pro, as it's a kind of a higher end one. Compare it to a Mac Pro, go over the pluses and minuses of both, and kind of just inform the general public. So let's get right into it, okay? In the video, I'll show you my system, what I put into it, how much it costs, that kind of thing. And then I'll compare it to a Mac Pro, benchmark-wise, to a Mac Pro that is very comparable to my system, and then also to a much higher one. The higher one, of course, being MKBHD's 8-core Mac Pro, and then I have another one, since mine's a quad-core, comparing to a quad-core Mac Pro. Look at price, performance, everything. So pluses and minuses of a Hackintosh ran a Mac Pro. So obviously with a Mac Pro, pluses, it's from Apple, so you know everything in it is going to work, right? You know everything that you select is certified by Apple to work in that system. So there's really no malfunctions or hiccups or anything like that to worry about, other than just your normal stuff. Size, obviously. I don't know if you can see it. Mine is under there. It's quite large. I got that case a long time ago with my last computer because I was tired of the cases that I hate. Every time I build a new computer, the case I have would be too small and I have to get a new case. So I just went for the biggest one possible that I could afford at the time. It's a great case. It still fits everything I need. Obviously, really, space isn't really a concern for me, but for some people it might be. And might also just be looking for simple aesthetics. You want to look good in your workspace. So size. Obviously, you've seen the Mac Pro. It's quite smaller. It's probably really maybe like an eighth of the size of that computer. So much smaller. It's going to be a lot quieter probably. This one's pretty quiet. I, of course, could make it quieter by getting some quieter fans. And if I really wanted to, I could buy even a different case that is meant for being quiet. This one isn't really geared towards that. It's pretty quiet enough for me. I can still watch TV. I can still hold conversations. It's on right now, obviously you can't hear it. So it works for me, but obviously Mac Pro is probably going to be more quiet. It's kind of designed for that. And it really just depends on what you build. Hackintosh could be just as quiet. Minuses of a Mac Pro. Expandability. Obviously, once you pick whatever you pick, that's kind of what you're going to have forever. So, if you pick a Mac Pro with D300 cards, you're going to have D300 cards. If you want to upgrade them, I'm really not sure if you can take the graphics cards out of a Mac Pro and put in, like, let's say you got D300s and then you bought a couple of D700s. If you could swap them, I haven't seen any articles or anybody saying anything about that. I know the D3, the D5, and the D700s were made especially for the Mac Pro, so I know they're different in size, so really the only place you could probably buy them would be from Apple. I don't think they sell them by themselves, and then I guess if you could take them out, you probably would only find probably some D500s, because people with D500s would probably swap them out for D700s and then sell their D500s, and people with D300s would buy those D500s. But I don't think you're going to find any loose D300s, which, unless your D300s went out, why would you want to put in more D300s? and you're probably not going to find any D700s because that's probably what people are wanting to upgrade to. So once you configure what you're going to configure and get that computer, that's what you're going to have forever until you buy a new Mac Pro. I think the only thing you can really change in a Mac Pro is the amount of RAM. You might be able to put new hard drives in. I know that PCIe. I'm not sure, so we're going to go with just RAM. And it takes some really specific RAM too, so there's not much to choose from when looking for that type of RAM anyway. Another minus would probably be, well, that's kind of it. So your main plus, in my opinion, would be size, and your main con would be expandability. Now, with a Hackintosh Pro, I think there are a lot more pluses than there was on the Mac Pro. Obviously, you have a lot more expandability. Now, with a Hackintosh, obviously only certain components work. But even when I was configuring a Mac Pro to see what the price would be for a comparable Hack Pro, really all you can choose is between, I think, 3 or 4 processors, 3 or 4 amounts of RAM, and 3 different hard drive or graphics cards. That's it for a Mac Pro. For a Hack Pro, there's more. There's probably about at least 10 to 15 motherboards you can choose from. Hard drive doesn't really matter. Whatever is compatible with your motherboard will work. So that's really sky's the limit. Graphics cards is probably about 10, maybe 15 graphics cards you can choose from. RAM. There's not that much RAM that I know of, but once you find the amount you want, that you buy it. So, and then obviously tons of cases. Everything else is kind of whatever you want. So, I was gonna put expandability or configurability in the minus for Hack Pro, but when I compared it to the Mac Pro, it's actually a plus. So, second is expandability. With a Hack Pro, depending on the case you get, obviously like my size case, I could put in many more hard drives if I wanted to. I could change the graphics cards if I wanted to. Obviously, I have to get one that's designed or that works with the Hack Pro, but there's more options on the Hack Pro side than there is on the Mac Pro side. I could put more memory in if I wanted to, RAM that is, or I could just completely build a whole new one. And let's say maybe I just want to get a different processor. I could do that. Or maybe I just want to get a new motherboard and processor. My RAM still works and my graphics card still works. I can do that. So it's a lot more like upgrading a PC. So that's a plus. Another plus for Hack Pro is I can run and I am running, a full bootable version of Windows on another hard drive. So when this computer boots up, I can either select Windows or Mac. By default, it'll load in a Mac if I don't do anything, but if I push a key, I just hit an arrow, and now I go to Windows. So I can boot right into Windows, play games. That's really all I use the Windows for now is games. And then everything else I use in the Mac. So on the Mac side, you can run Boot Camp or Parallels, and you're kind of running an emulated version of Windows. It's not the best for gaming, again, because you only have the hardware that you chose before, but so you can get Windows on a Mac, but it's not as good as having a full version of PC Windows, like you would on a Hackintosh. Obviously, another con for Hackintosh Pro would be no support. So if something goes wrong, I can't take this into the Geek Squad and have them service it for me. But to build a Hackintosh, you kind of have to be pretty knowledgeable in computers, so you probably can diagnose it yourself. So it is a con, and it's not a con, in my opinion. So that's it for the pros and cons. Obviously, in my opinion, there are more pros on the Hackintosh side than there are on the Mac side, and there's only about the same amount of cons on each one. So the reason why I built a Hackintosh Pro was that I needed a new computer. My computer that I had before this was getting old, and the graphics cards that I had weren't really running the games that I wanted to play at the time. Well, it wasn't very long ago. But I don't like Windows 8 at all. Don't like it, especially for a desktop computer. Tablet, sure. Yeah, it works okay on a tablet. Would I get it on a tablet? Probably not. I'd go Android, then iPad, then maybe Windows. Laptop, kind of works on there. I don't really see the point of a touchscreen laptop. In my opinion, laptop should still be mouse and keyboard and screen. Uh, if you're going to have a touchscreen, then why have a keyboard? That's a tablet. Desktop, definitely not. I think Windows 8 is the dumbest thing for desktop. It's not designed for desktops at all. It's designed for touch, not for mouse. So I don't like it. I've only used it for a little bit and I hate it. So that leaves me with Windows 7 still, which I do like Windows 7, but I thought to myself, I really do like the Mac setup. OS X or Mavericks, but I don't want an iMac because I want to use one of my own screens, and it's just not powerful enough in my opinion, and I don't want to spend the money for a Mac Pro. So where does that leave me? Hack Pro or Hackintosh. So that's why I built the Hackintosh. I saw I could run both uh, Mavericks and Windows, so I thought, awesome, best of both worlds. I can play games on Windows, and I can do everything else on the Mac side. The computer that I built can do video editing. It's not the best for video editing, but it will definitely get the job done. My web surfing, music, Photoshop, all that stuff. It does it no problem. I have had a couple hiccups here and there, but I've got pretty much all those ironed out, and now it runs pretty much flawlessly. So that's why I built the Hackintosh. Okay, so now let's take a look at the systems, or my system, and then we'll compare it benchmark-wise to the other systems, the other two Mac Pros that I found online, and yeah, then you can judge for yourself. Is a Hack Pro worth it? Leave it in the comments below. Let me know if you think it's worth it. Let me know if you like what you saw. You can still go with Mac Pro, or if you like, Hack Pro definitely is worth it in my opinion. Okay, so let's take a look at the system that I built. Okay, so here is the setup for, or the components that I put into my Hack Pro. I got all the parts, most all the parts from newegg.com. And as you can see in the upper right there, the total price was pretty much $1,300 even. Now this doesn't include a case. I used the case that I already had for my last build, as you kind of saw from the beginning of the video. And this doesn't include the CPU water cooling. Inside I do have a Corsair H100i CPU water cooler. I pretty much got it for free through some gift card stuff that I had, so I didn't include it in here, and I think I bought it off Amazon anyway. But other than that, I also had some other hard drives that I already had. I think 3 other hard drives. One of them is being used for the Windows boot image, and then the other 2 I think are just storage. And then the hard drive that I bought here. So let's go down the list, and then we'll compare it to the 2 Mac Pros. So for the motherboard, we have the Gigabyte GA-z87X-OC. The OC stands for overclock. This motherboard is very overclock friendly. Right on the motherboard, there are several buttons just dedicated to overclocking, including one button labeled Turbo. That's the button that I actually have enabled. What that button does is Gigabyte will take the optimized settings for the graphics cards and the memory and the CPU that you have in there and overclock it to what it thinks the best frequency would be. In my case, it overclocked the CPU from as you can see here, 3.5 gigahertz to 4.3 gigahertz. So that's all I went with. The board does everything else for me. I figured, yep, that's pretty cool. I'll just leave it at that. And now I have this cool light on the motherboard that says Turbo that's lit. For processor, we went with a 4th core Core i7-4770K. K stands for overclocking again. Quad core. The stock speed is 3.5 gigahertz. But like I just said, I pushed the turbo button, that overclocked it to 4.3 gigahertz. The flash drives, those were just for making boot images for the Hackintosh, so kind of ignore those. The Assassin's Creed came with the graphics cards. Hard drive, this is the hard drive that I'm actually running Mac on. So it is a WD green 2 terabyte, 64 megabyte cache, SATA 6.0. So I think I said earlier SATA 3. Obviously, it's SATA 6. It's nothing special, just a regular magnetic hard drive. I didn't really want to put much money into the hard drives. Um, I don't really think that that's a critical part for what I'm using the computer for. All the applications that I use pretty much boot everything into RAM after I've loaded the application. So, I could, if I put more money into them, and I could have, got some solid state drives and run them in RAID, or I could have even got PCIe memory. I would still be much cheaper than the Mac Pro, but really, I think all I would gain is just faster load times. So loading the computer, loading the applications. After everything's loaded, it's in RAM anyway, so didn't think it was that huge of a deal. Speaking of RAM, that's next up here. We have 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengence low profile RAM. Didn't go with low profile for any specific reason. That's just what the buyer's guide for this particular system suggested, so I went with that. I'm not sure if RAM is one of those parts that on a Hackintosh that is super critical that you have to get right, like the motherboard, the CPU, and the processor, or the graphics cards. But I went with just what was on the guide, just so I didn't run into any problems. As you can see, it's DDR3 1600, and I have 16 gigabytes of it. And lastly, we went with 2 EVGA SuperClocked versions of the GeForce GTX 760 2 gigabyte versions. So I have 2 of those running in there. This I think would probably be mostly comparable to the D300s, but when I got into the benchmarks and I compared them to one that has 2 D300s, I kind of destroyed them in my opinion. So probably, actually, once in the benchmarks, I kind of beat the D700s as well. So, uh, you know, really, I think the cards that I got are probably most comparable, probably to the D700s. Obviously, they're not workstation quality like the D700, 3, and 500s are. That would for NVIDIA would have to be probably comparable to the Quattro series, but I didn't need workstation grade graphics cards. Mostly using the graphics cards for games on my Windows side, and lightly video editing. I've just started to get into that, and Photoshop, and then just regular computer usage. So these are more than powerful for what I need them for. And once you see the benchmarks here, I destroyed the D300s and scored higher than the D700s. So take it for what it is. I think it's comparable to D700s. Quality-wise, maybe not, but I've never had a graphics card go out on me in my whole history of owning computers. So that's a system. That's what I have inside. Again, the only thing missing from this is the case, obviously, which is a Cooler Master half for half. I'm not really sure how they pronounce it. 932 Advanced version, and then the Corsair H100i CPU water cooler. And then the hard drives that I already had that are just storage drives. Other than that, that's everything I have, and it came out to $1,300. If you add the H100i in there, full at normal price, it probably raises it to about $1,400, $1,450. But I got, like I said, I think for free or like $10, just paid for shipping. So $1,310, $1,320 is what I paid total for this build. If we compare that to a comparable Mac Pro, we probably have to look at this one right here, which is the core, or the for processor is the quad core, obviously, match the cores there. It looks like the Mac Pro uses only Xeon cores, which means they can't overclock, not that you really could in a Mac anyway. But 3.7 gigahertz. Mine came stock at 3.5, but I overclocked it to 4.3 with a push of a button. So a little bit higher clock speeds, and once we get into the benchmarks, you'll see that mine scored higher than this quad core. Memory, I have 16 gigs, so I selected 16 gigs. Storage, I just left it on the base one because, obviously I'm running 2 terabytes, but the memory that I'm running is not PCIe memory, so adding $800 for the 1 TB PC, I didn't think that was comparable, because really these hard drives on this Mac Pro are much better, and you could easily just run this 256 GB one that it comes with to run the system and the apps, and then buy a 1 or 2 TB external USB 3.0 or one of the Fusion drives for storage. So I just left it on the base. Graphics, I left it at the AMD D300s, which is the base ones, because the graphics cards that I had or I have 2 GB of memory, and these ones have 2 GB of memory. But as you'll see, once we get into the benchmarks, I scored much higher than the D300s in every test, and I scored higher than the D700s in all the tests as well. So, you could add, if you change this to D700s, it would add $1,000, and it would still be pretty comparable in my opinion. But I left it at the D300s, and with that, the price comes out to $3,099. So we'll just round that up to $3,100 or $3,100. If you change them to D700s, which I think are actually much more comparable to the two 760s that I'm running, it's $4,100 or $4,100. So if you compare that to mine of $1,300 versus $4,100, you're looking at a difference of $2,200. So, even if I took half of that savings, so $1,100, I could then get my hard drives to be the same as the Mac Pro, if not better, and would still save $1,100. But I didn't. Like I said, hard drives aren't that big or as important to me, so I have a savings of $2,200, I believe it was. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the benchmarks. Okay, so let's take a look at the benchmarks now. We'll be comparing my computer, and you already saw the specs for that, and we'll be comparing it to two Mac Pros that I found. One being a 4-core Mac Pro. Now that's probably going to be the most comparable to mine, as you saw with the Mac Pro that we configured online. That's going to be the most comparable, and then to MKBHD's Mac Pro. So the first one, the 4-core, is the 4-core Xeon, and it has two D300 cards. So it's lowest end cards from Apple, and then 12 GB of RAM. So I do have a little bit more RAM than it does. I don't think that's going to make a huge difference, especially in the benchmarks. And as you saw, it would be another $100 for this guy to put the same amount of RAM that I have in there. Second Mac Pro, and this one's just kind of first for kicks and giggles, is going to be MKBHD's Mac Pro, which is the 8-core version, and he is running two D700 cards. So the highest end card from Apple, and he has 64 GB of RAM. So the max amount of RAM that you can put in that, his is pretty much maxed out. Okay, so the first benchmark is Geekbench. I scored for single core 4,253, and for multi-core 16,859. So, in my opinion, that's pretty good. If we compare that to the 4-core Mac Pro, he scored 3,558 for single core, so I beat him there, and 14,079 for multi-core, so I also beat him there. So as you can see for Geekbench, which, if I am not mistaken, mostly measures CPU performance, I beat him there. So my 4-core i7 4th gen was faster than his Xeon 4-core. Now, of course, mine's overclocked. If you were able to overclock a Mac Pro, he'd probably actually score about the same. But he can't, and I just push a button to do mine, and I scored better. Now, with the second Mac Pro, MKBHD's 8-core version, he scored 3,636 for single core and 26,092. So I still beat him with single core, and that's probably just because if you look at 1 core of his versus 1 core of mine, I think the Xeon is clocked at 3.7 gigahertz, or I'm sorry, no, 2.7 gigahertz, and mine is clocked at 4.3. So that's probably why I still beat him on the single core. In multi-core, he destroyed me. Well, actually, I wouldn't say destroy. you would think since he has double the cores and double the threads, that he'd probably score almost double, but he didn't. He only scored about 10,000 more. So not a huge jump, but still kind of substantial. The second benchmark is Cinibench. Now, this is probably going to be the most accurate. It takes GPUs into account, CPUs into account. If you watch MKBHD's video, he also thinks that this is probably the most accurate and most functional benchmark to kind of use to compare the computers. So I scored 98.11 frames per second on the GPU, and for CPU I scored 854. Now, I ran it a few times. The first time I ran it is when I got 854 for the CPU, and I forgot to take a screenshot of it. So the screenshot you're seeing is 844, but I promise you, I did get 854. Now, if we compare that to the 4-core Mac Pro, he scored 71.04 frames per second, so I scored 27 frames higher than he did. And for CPU, he scored 630, so I'm 224 CBs, whatever that is, higher than the 4-core Mac Pro. Now, if we compare that to MKBHD's, he scored 86.18 frames per second, so my graphics cards are actually have more frames per second than his by 11.93. So that's pretty substantial in my opinion, because his graphics cards add $1,000 to the Mac Pro price, and mine still scored higher. So yeah, for CPU he scored 1,223. So he scored 369 higher than I did, which in my opinion, I don't really know what a CB is that this is measuring in. But that's not very much for double the cores, double the threads. So, and to go with that processor adds $2,000 to the Mac Pro price. So even just to kind of match what MKBHD is to the base Mac Pro that we showed you earlier, that compares to mine, would be $3,000. And in some cases, it's not even as good, and in some cases, it is. So the next benchmark is Blackmagic. This measures hard drive write and read speeds. Now, I knew this is where both of them were going to destroy me. I am just running a basic SATA 3, I believe it is, hard drive, so nothing really special. In my opinion, the hard drive isn't really that critical of a piece of hardware. You really only use it to load the system, and then whatever apps you're loading, and then all the stuff that the computer is going to use loads that into RAM. So, I could put PCIe memory in there. I looked at it; it's between like $3,000 and $1,000, and I'd still be cheaper by quite a bit. But if we look at the scores, though, I scored 152 for write and 151.6 for read. The 4-core Mac Pro scored 729 for write, and 930 for read. And MKBHD's 8-core version scored 890 for write and 990 for read. So they destroyed me, but in my opinion, not that big of a deal for the hard drive. And I could get hard drives, solid state drives, run them in RAID. If you go to MKBHD's channel, his Hackintosh that he had before his Mac Pro was in RAID, and still was not quite as fast. But I could also put in PCIe hard drives, and would probably be pretty close to what both of those guys scored, and so would still be considerably cheaper, especially if you take into account MKBHD's with all the upgrades that he put into it. The last one is Novabench. I'm not really counting this one. I don't think it really read properly. If you look at the screenshot, it didn't even use my correct graphics card. It used the internal graphics card, or at least it's showing that it used the internal graphics card. I really have no way of telling if the score that it got was in relation to the integrated graphics on my processor, or if those are actually the scores for my NVIDIA cards. So if you go to MKBHD's channel too, he also didn't really think that this test was really running correctly. But I put it on there because MKBHD ran it. The 4-core Mac Pro didn't run it, so take it for what it is. I scored 1,661, and MKBHD scored 2,254. So if I could get it to read the right graphics, then I would know if that score is accurate or not. But like I said, not even MKBHD doesn't really think that's an accurate test. So as you can see, my computer is considerably cheaper. It scored much better than the 4-core Mac Pro in pretty much everything except hard drive, which, like I said, I could probably match that if I put in another $500. But to me, it wasn't worth it. All the critical stuff that I run runs perfectly fine, and the applications put what it needs to in RAM anyway. But graphics card wise, I destroyed the D300s in both Geekbench and Cinibench, and I scored better than the D700s on Cinibench. So graphics card wise, I win. CPU wise, I beat the Xeon 4-core Mac Pro in every test, and came just below the 8-core version. So I thought the 8-core version was going to be a lot better. In my opinion, the scores that the 8-core version got for CPUs would be what I would probably be more towards the 6-core. But it didn't, so it'd be funny to see what the 6-core scores. It probably wouldn't be that much more than what I scored. Now again, I overclocked mine. My motherboard has an easy button to do that. And if I could even overclock it more if I wanted to, but I just went with what the motherboard suggests, and that's the scores we got. So take it for what it is. In my opinion, a Hackintosh Pro is definitely worth building. And comparing it to a Mac Pro, I think it is a way better of a computer. But if you don't know how to do it, it is a little bit on the difficult side and advanced side for computer knowledge. And if you have the money, I guess just buy a Mac Pro. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you have a Hack Pro? What is your score? I'd love to take a look. If you have a Mac Pro and you got different scores than the two that I found, put it in the comments. I'll take a look. But yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'll try and answer it too as well. But until next time, this is what a Hack Pro, or Hackintosh Pro as some people call it, is all about. See you later.